This is the end, my only friend, the end. Yeah, I'm glad I didn't quit my day job to try to sing I Suck at Karaoke. This is the last video of this week, or at least the main series of them. I plan on having a few others, one on student surveys once the university releases their policy on those, and then the research proposals once I finish marking those, which I hope to do as soon as I finish recording and converting and uploading these videos. But I wanted to take this time to kind of go through and touch on a few of the main themes for the course and to try to wrap it up, not necessarily with a nice clean bow, but with a couple of takeaways that I want to stress, some ongoing questions and issues, and kind of reflect on where we've been over the last 12 weeks. So I think when I designed the course, I designed it around a few fundamental questions. Namely, more generally, how can environmental scarcity or abundance affect human security and conflict? And underlying that, in looking at the causes of conflict, why do state and non-state actors use violence, and why do individuals use violence? And so the end outcome that is of interest in this class is also one that's interest in most of my research, is why do people use violence? If you want to understand the international system and to try to make the world a better place, or to try to understand the fundamental problems of cooperation and try to reduce harm, then trying to reduce the kind of violence that we see over the course of history is one of those kind of main goals. And it's also kind of underlying a lot of the main questions that we've asked over the last 12 weeks. And over those 12 weeks, I kind of broke up this story of how these background environmental change, human security issues affect violence into three main areas. The first was just basic definitions of what's the outcome that we're talking about, who are the actors involved in either perpetrating or being victims of that outcome, and what are their interests and why do they do what they do, right? So looking at basic definitions of instability, of conflict, of human security, and environmental change, and scarcity and human security broadly defined. The middle part of the class defined specific subtypes of resources or scarcity or abundance that could lead to issues related to instability and violence. And last week and this week, we're kind of looking at how state and non-state actors have responded to that through either cooperative efforts, international agreements, to be able to try to regulate or to diffuse tensions within the international system. I've tried to include a wide variety of different types of cases in this class to try to be inclusive geographically, try to focus on contemporary issues while also including some more historical examples. We've covered Africa from Burundi to Mali, South Sudan, Kenya, and Ethiopia, to Latin America and North America with Venezuela and Louisiana, Middle East, different types of resource responses, land degradation, natural disasters in Indonesia, Central Asia, El Salvador, Honduras, Syria, Nepal. I've tried to be as inclusive as possible. In 12 weeks, I can't include everyone, but I think one of the main things I've tried to spend time on and to show you is the number of different types of states there are, the number of different ways that interests can conflict, and the issue areas in which they can conflict over, and the number of ways that people have responded to those challenges is limited by my knowledge and the knowledge of the literature, of course, but I've tried to include as much breadth as I could in this class. That was kind of goal one, is to try to show you a bit about the world that you might not have come across, right? The Arctic, pretty much as far away from Australia as you can get, but one in which it's dramatically important for some of the major international challenges that some of the main states face, and has implications for Australian territorial waters and potentially our territorial claims in the Antarctic as well. The second main goal is to try to give you the tools to be able to digest different types of research, to be able to synthesize it in a way that can make sense to you and to tie it to your own lives, and to be able to communicate it to other people. And the first part of that was to try to learn how to read some kind of articles that you might not have come across in your specific subfields, and to realize that there are commonalities in the research approaches across different fields. Though, of course, this approach is informed by the political science literature that I come from in training, but then also the types of research that's been influential towards these major intergovernmental efforts like the IPCC. So for the articles, I've tried to encourage students to look at the theoretical contribution, what people are really trying to add to the discussion about a specific outcome, and how important that contribution is to explaining that specific outcome. So look for the theoretical contribution and the substantive effects, right? So if you're trying to weigh the relative importance of different explanations for conflict, if state capacity is something that is seen as having the largest substantive effect, then maybe that should lead to different kinds of policies for governments to try to increase their capacity, for foreign governments to try to encourage that in developing states. Then I made links to the articles that we've read, to the kind of research structure that I was trying to encourage you to use in your essays, because it's often consistent for how research essays are written, starting with intro, literature review, argument, and theory, which leads to observable hypotheses, how you design your research for testing your hypotheses, how you discuss your results, how you can look at robustness checks. So if your case is focused on one specific case, can you try to think what are the limitations if you try to apply it to a different case, or if you use different data sets, how your results might differ. And then you end up with your conclusion and implications for future research or policy. So that's kind of the lifespan of the modern research essay, and through the assessment in this class, I try to tie it to that to give you as much practice directly as possible. We highlighted a couple of challenges to interpretation for any research that we look at, especially in human systems that are complex and multidimensional and have a wide variety of different actors involved. I talked about three specific challenges from the outset: endogeneity, spuriousness, and levels and change. Endogeneity is when you can have your outcome being shaped by your explanatory factor, but then the explanatory factor also being shaped by the outcome you're interested in. So that's maybe the relationship is not necessarily going the direction that you expect. Spuriousness is just that something else could be causing both of the things you care about, the thing you're trying to explain, and the main causal story for it. And then levels versus change. When we look at a lot of things in the world, it's at a snapshot in time, but maybe what's really important is not necessarily where we are now, but how much things have changed over time, right? Like those graphs of the sea level rise, or the feedback effects for the CO2 emissions, that the speed and the rapid shocks, like in Venezuelan oil prices, could be, and the decline in rents could be important, right? So these are different challenges, and encourage you for your research papers to think about the limits of your argument or other complicating factors when you're trying to make your case to address these kind of challenges for interpretation. Keep coming back to Homer Dixon and his and the Toronto approach to try to understand the links between environmental scarcity and conflict. One of the earliest, and I would argue the most influential kind of explanation for this multi-step process that informed how I designed the class, as well as a lot of the literature has approached this topic, in which you have these sources of environmental scarcity as the background conditions leading to social effects in the middle that could lead to migration, decreasing economic productivity, weakened state capacity, whatever, and then that could have an effect on the kinds of conflict that we've looked at. And through This relatively simple graph, you can complicate it in various ways that are the most relevant to you, making reciprocal effects or looking at feedback effects between the variables or whatever, that you can make a path diagram to simplify your argument that captures what you find important while also unfortunately leaving out things that are not essential to the main argument you're trying to make. Homer Dixon spends a lot of time talking about scarcity and conflict. So a couple of main kind of takeaways for linking renewable resource scarcity, which I of course tied to cooking, and how resource scarcity is related to these kind of things. Environmental change shrinks the resource pie, which can kind of lead to absolute scarcity. Population growth divides the pie into smaller slices, which can also lead to scarcity for specific populations. And unequal resource distribution means that certain groups get larger parts of the pie than others. Linking that to human security threats, you can see the multifaceted understanding of human security by the various literatures we've looked at in this semester, from economic, political, food, health, environmental, personal, and community human security definitions, as well as threats to those security that we've covered in this class. We've covered a lot of ground, but I think it's a topic that's multifaceted, and by approaching it in different angles, we can see the broader picture. Right, kind of like you have that software now that you can look at one particular picture in a commercial and you zoom back and it's part of a much larger mosaic. What we're trying to make is that larger mosaic of trying to understand environmental security and conflict. The three types of observable hypotheses that come from the Homer-Dixon approach: that simple scarcity wars, group identity conflicts, and deprivation, that link directly to those different types of scarcity that are pie related, right? Kind of linking it to the climate change and conflict discussion that we've seen addressed by a number of different authors over the course of the semester. I think some of the main takeaways, I'd be interested in your discussion about this in the workshop this week, is that climate change overall is a threat multiplier for political instability. By itself, it's not a necessary or sufficient condition, but it can have an interactive effect with a lot of these other factors that we've covered this semester. So yeah, environmental conditions by themselves cannot predict violent outbreaks as of yet, but they can exacerbate existing conditions. Now, kind of like with the democratic peace, there might be some sea change that could lead us to question these assumptions in subsequent years, but by and large, that's in 2020 is kind of the state of the art for understanding the connections between climate change and conflict, that everyone from the IPCC and Gladich and others have concluded that it's a multi-step interactive process and that climate change by itself is not necessary or sufficient. Ways of responding, we've covered already. I'll just touch on these briefly: mitigation, adaptation, and the kind of multilateral international responses that we've touched on today, ranging from going it alone to coming together as a human society to decide on what's norms of behavior that are expected of all of us. That's it. Hopefully we've taken a step back, that we've understood the water in which we swim, and that we've decided consciously to respond to it in a way that can be positive and to make a contribution to it, and that we understand the world in which we live, and that we can make our decisions as you go forward in your undergraduate career and afterwards, how you decide to act on a day-to-day basis given the realities that we're faced with. So thank you for a great semester. I've really enjoyed it. I look forward to the final workshops this week. And for all of you who are graduating, congratulations. And for those of you who aren't there yet, you'll be there before you know it. So I'm glad to have played some small part in that undergraduate journey. I look forward to reading your research papers, and I hope you have a great summer.